My daughter-in-law, Brenda, stood before me, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. The argument had started over something so trivial, a chipped teacup from my wedding set that I'd found carelessly left in the sink. A simple, "Please be more careful, this has sentimental value," had been the match that lit the fuse. The spit was warm, a shocking wet slap against my cheek that seemed to hang in the air for a moment before slowly tracing a cold path down my skin. I, Sophia Vance, 70 years old and a widow for 10, stood frozen in the kitchen of the home I had shared with my late husband for 45 years. "I am so sick of your precious things and your precious memories," Brenda had shrieked, her voice scraping the walls of the quiet home. "This isn't a museum, Sophia. We live here now. This is my home," I'd said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I've asked for one small corner of it to be treated with respect." That's when my son Mark had shuffled in, his face already set in that familiar, weary resignation. "Mom, can't you just let it go? It's a cup. You see." Brenda had turned on him, then back to me. "He gets it. You're a controlling, miserable old woman who can't stand that her son has a life of his own." And then she did it. She leaned in, her eyes blazing, and she spat. "That's what I think of your sentimental value." I didn't wipe it away immediately. I turned my head very slowly and looked at my son, my only child, the boy I'd read stories to, bandage skin knees for, and sacrifice for. I waited for him to be outraged, to defend his mother. He shrugged, a small helpless gesture that broke my heart more completely than any shout ever could. "Well, Mom, you have to admit you can be difficult. You kind of asked for it. You kind of asked for it." Those 5 words landed with more force than the physical insult. They were the final confirmation of a truth I'd been avoiding for the 6 months they'd been temporarily living with me after Mark lost his job. I said nothing. I reached for a tea towel, wiped my face with deliberate calm, placed the towel on the counter, and walked out of the kitchen. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, the same one I'd shared with my Robert, and I locked the door. I didn't cry. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, and I stared at his photograph on the nightstand. For 45 years, this house had been my sanctuary. It held the echoes of Robert's laughter, the ghost of Mark's childhood, the warmth of a life built together. Now it felt like a prison, occupied by strangers who saw me as an inconvenient landmark in their lives. But as I sat there, the initial shock and hurt began to curdle into something else. Something cold, hard, and purposeful. A quiet fury began to burn in the ashes of my grief. They thought I was a helpless old woman, a piece of furniture to be tolerated until they could get back on their feet. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had no idea about the resources I had, the patience I possessed, or the will I had inherited from my own formidable mother. By the time the first light of dawn touched my window, I had a plan. It was a beautiful, intricate plan, and it started with pancakes. I rose before the sun, moving with a quiet efficiency I hadn't felt in years. The kitchen, the scene of last night's humiliation, became my stage. I whipped up a feast fit for a king, or for a guilty son and his vile wife. Buttermilk pancakes, crispy bacon, maple sausage, golden hash browns, a fruit salad, and my famous cinnamon orange French toast. The air grew thick with the comforting sense of vanilla, cinnamon, and frying bacon. I set the dining table with my best linen and china, the very set Brenda had mocked as stuffy. I arranged everything perfectly. They came downstairs around 8, drawn by the aroma. Their eyes widened at the spread. Mark had the decency to look slightly ashamed, but Brenda's face was a picture of smug victory. "Good," Mark said, a note of relief in his voice as he sat down. "You finally understood your place." That's when they noticed I wasn't alone. A man was sitting at the head of the table in Robert's old chair, calmly slicing a piece of French toast. He was immaculately dressed in a charcoal gray suit, his silver hair perfectly combed. He ate with the quiet confidence of a man who belonged there. Mark froze, a sausage link halfway to his mouth. "Mom? Who is this?" Brenda's smug expression evaporated, replaced by confusion and a dawning alarm. I smiled sweetly. "Mark, Brenda, I'd like you to meet Mr. Alistair Finch. He's my attorney." Brenda's coffee mug slipped from her hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. The sound was violently loud in the tense silence. No one moved to clean it up. Alistair stood, wiping his mouth with a napkin before extending a hand. "A pleasure," he said, his voice a calm, deep baritone that seemed to absorb the chaos. "Your mother has told me quite a bit about you." The way he said it left no doubt that what she'd told him was not flattering. "An attorney?" Brenda's voice was a strained squeak. "Sophia, what is this? What do you need a lawyer for?" "Well," I said, taking a delicate bite of a strawberry, "after last night's conversation, I realized my estate planning was woefully out of date. Alistair specializes in situations like mine." "What kind of situations?" Mark asked, his voice tight. Alistair opened his briefcase, which had been resting against the table leg, and removed a thick, legal-sized folder. "Situations involving elder abuse. Your mother called me at 6 this morning, describing the events of last night. Spitting on a senior citizen in their own home constitutes assault under state law." Brenda went pale. "I didn't assault anyone. It was a heated argument. She provoked me." "Bodily fluids constitute assault, Mrs. Vance," Alistair replied, his tone utterly matter-of-fact. "But we're not here to discuss criminal charges. Not today. We're here to discuss your mother-in-law's last will and testament." The silence that followed was so profound I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. "My will," I repeated, nodding. "Oh yes. I've decided to make some significant changes." Mark slumped in his chair. "Mom, this is dramatic. Brenda apologizes, don't you, Bren?" "It was a mistake." But Brenda wasn't apologizing. She was staring at Alistair as if he were a viper. "What changes?" she demanded, cutting straight to the chase. Alistair slid a document across the table. "Mrs. Vance currently has you and Mark listed as the sole beneficiaries of this house, her investment portfolio, and her life insurance policy. A total estate valued at approximately $1.8 million. I watched the word currently hit them like a physical blow. "Had," I clarified softly. "Past tense." "However," Alistair continued, "given recent events, she has decided to explore alternative options for her legacy." "Alternative options?" Mark's voice was barely a whisper. "Charitable organizations," I said cheerfully. "The local historical society, for one. Robert loved this town's history. And there's a wonderful program that provides service dogs for veterans. I think Robert would have liked that." Brenda found her voice sharp and desperate. "You can't do this. We're your family." "Family," I said, meeting her gaze squarely, "does not spit on family." "Sophia, I apologize," Brenda said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I was stressed. Mark's job situation. I wasn't thinking. It will never happen again." "Of course it won't," I agreed. "Because you will be moving out." The second bombshell landed with even greater force than the first. "Moving out." Mark shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly. "Mom, we can't. You know our situation. I'm between jobs." "I am well aware of your situation, Mark. You've been between jobs for 6 months." And Brenda was let go from her position at the dental. The house settled into an uneasy, quiet rhythm after Brenda's return. It was a peace brokered by fear and necessity, not affection, but I would take it. The air no longer crackled with imminent conflict, but it was thick with unspoken words and careful movements. Brenda kept to her side of the house, and I to mine. She left for her waitressing shift at a family diner before dawn, and Mark for his dispatching job by 7. They returned in the evening, often too tired for anything more than a quiet dinner in their converted basement apartment. The extravagant, home-cooked meals ceased. I cooked for myself and they fended for themselves. It was a practical, if lonely, arrangement. Mark made a point of checking on me each evening. He'd knock on my sitting room door, a habit he'd resurrected from his teenage years. "Everything all right, Mom? Need anything from the store?" It was a small gesture, but it was something. A thread of the old connection, fragile but holding. One Thursday evening, he lingered in the doorway. "The counseling, it's helping, I think. We're talking about things we should have talked about years ago." "I'm glad to hear it, Mark," I said, looking up from my book. Honest communication is the foundation of everything. He nodded, shoving his hands in his pockets. She's trying. It's hard for her to admit she was wrong. It always has been. Pride is a heavy burden to carry, I said. It weighs you down more than any debt. He gave me a sad, knowing smile. I'm starting to see that. He paused. The auction for the cards ended today. I had been following it. The final bid for the complete collection had been a staggering $42,000. The transfer was already initiated. I saw. I'm not going to ask you for it, he said quickly, holding up a hand. I want you to know I understand why you did it. We took advantage. We were entitled. That money. It's a price I'm willing to pay to finally wake up. His words felt like a balm on a wound I thought had scarred over. This wasn't the petulant boy from the breakfast table. This was a man, humbled and beginning to find his footing. The money is already allocated, Mark, I said gently. But the lesson it purchased appears to have been worth every penny. He nodded again, a look of profound relief on his face, as if he'd been expecting a harsher verdict. Good night, Mom. Good night, son. As he closed the door, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The first real green shoot of hope had broken through the frozen ground. The peace was shattered 2 weeks later by a pounding on the front door that was far too aggressive to be a friendly visitor. I peered through the peephole to see a hulking man in a leather vest, his arms covered in tattoos, his face set in a scowl. I didn't open the door. Can I help you? I called through the wood. Is Brenda Vance here? He barked. Who is asking? Tell her Leo is here. She knows what for. My blood ran cold. I retreated to the kitchen and called Mark's cell. There's a man named Leo at the front door looking for Brenda. He looks unpleasant. I heard Mark swear under his breath. Don't let him in, Mom. Don't even talk to him. I'm on my way. 20 minutes later, Mark's car screeched into the driveway. He confronted the man on the porch. From the kitchen window, I watched the conversation, my heart thumping. It was tense, filled with sharp gestures. The man Leo jabbed a finger at Mark's chest. Mark, to his credit, stood his ground, though I could see the fear in his posture. Finally, Leo threw his hands up in disgust, got into a beat-up truck and sped away. Mark came inside, his face ashen. He sank into a chair at the kitchen table. Mark, what is going on? Who was that? He ran a hand over his face. It's another debt, Mom. One I didn't know about until last week. Brenda took out a loan. From him. A loan from a man who looks like that? What kind of loan? The kind with a very high interest rate and very big men who come to collect, he said, his voice hollow. $5,000. She borrowed it to try and cover our credit card minimums before we moved in here. She was too ashamed to tell me. $5,000. It might as well have been $5 million. With their current incomes, it was an impossible sum. This Leo, I asked, my mind already clicking into a cold, analytical mode. Is he a legitimate lender? Is he licensed? Mark let out a bitter laugh. Do you think a guy like that works for a bank? He's a loan shark, Mom. This is my life. This is the mess I'm in. I thought of Alistair Finch. I thought of the power of the law, a power far greater than any thug in a leather vest. Give me his full name, or whatever name Brenda has for him, and the details of the loan. Why? What are you going to do? I'm going to introduce Mr. Leo to a friend of mine, I said, picking up my phone. His name is Alistair. Alistair listened to my explanation with his typical, unflappable calm. Usury, he said simply. The interest rates these individuals charge are far beyond the legal limit. It's not a loan, it's extortion. Do you have any documentation? Mark managed to get a crumpled IOU from Brenda, with terms that made my blood run cold. This is more than enough, Alistair said. I'll make a call to a colleague in the district attorney's office. They have a unit that deals with predatory lending. They'll be very interested in Mr. Leo's business practices. The following day, a different car pulled up to my house. This one was an unmarked sedan. Two polite, well-dressed men from the financial crimes unit knocked on my door. I provided them with the IOU and a statement. They thanked me and left. We never saw Leo again. A week later, Mark received a brief letter on official letterhead stating that the debt had been declared null and void due to illegal lending practices, and that any further contact from the lender should be reported immediately to the police. The look on Mark's face when he read that letter was one of pure, unadulterated awe. It wasn't the awe of a child for a parent who could fix a toy. It was the awe of an adult realizing that the world operated on systems and rules, and that knowledge was a form of power he had never possessed. You just made it disappear," he stammered. "The law made it disappear," I corrected him. "I simply knew how to ask it for help. You don't have to fight every battle with your fists, Mark. Sometimes the pen and the right phone number are far more powerful." It was a turning point. For the first time, my son looked at me not as his mother, but as an ally of formidable capability. With the shadow of Leo removed, a new energy took hold of Mark. He came to me one Saturday morning, a determined look in his eyes and a folded piece of paper in his hand. "Mom, I have a proposal." I gestured for him to sit. "I'm listening. I've been working with the plumbers for 2 months now. I listen to them on the radio all day. I hear the jobs they go on, the money they make. I've been learning." He unfolded the paper. It was a rudimentary business plan. "I want to start my own handyman service. Not a full plumbing or electrical outfit, but the small jobs the big companies don't want. Fixing leaky faucets, assembling furniture, mounting TVs, painting, minor repairs." He slid the paper across to me. It was simple, but it was coherent. He had a list of potential tools and their costs, a pricing structure, and even ideas for advertising on community boards. "This is what you wanted the money for before," I stated. "Yes," he admitted. "But I'm not asking you for money. I'm asking you for a loan. A real one. With a contract, interest, and a repayment schedule. I've opened a separate bank account and I've saved $800 from my paychecks. I can put that down as a deposit on the tools." I was stunned. This was a different man entirely. This was responsibility. This was initiative. "How much are you asking for?" $2,000, he said, his voice firm. "It would get me the core tools, business cards, and a small ad in the local paper. I'd work evenings and weekends until I build up enough clients to go full-time." I looked over his plan. It was modest, achievable. It was good. "I'll need to discuss the terms with Alistair," I said. "But in principle, yes, Mark. I will loan you the money." The smile that broke across his face was the smile of my little boy, but filled with a grown man's pride. "Thank you, Mom. You won't regret this." See that I don't. Ark's fledgling business, Vance's reliable repairs, began to take off. He was personable, showed up on time, and did good work. The phone started to ring. Brenda, seeing his determination, seemed to soften. She started helping him with the books, keeping track of his appointments and expenses. For a few weeks, it seemed like the storm had truly passed. Then I came home from my book club to find Brenda in my study again. This time, she wasn't at the filing cabinet. She was at my desk, her back to the door, hunched over my checkbook. I stood in the doorway, silent, for a full minute before I spoke. "Find anything interesting?" She whirled around, guilt plastered across her face. "Sophia, I was balancing our household ledger and I thought I'd do yours too, to be helpful." "How thoughtful," I said, my voice like ice. I walked over and gently took the checkbook from her hands. The last few stubs had little pencil marks next to them. She'd been cataloging my spending. "You'll notice I keep my own ledgers, Brenda. And they are none of your business." The old defiance flashed in her eyes. "I have a right to know what's going on. You're loaning Mark money for his little hobby, but what about us? What about our future? That land your mother left you, the one by the highway, you're going to sell it, aren't you? You're sitting on a fortune and you're hoarding it all for yourself." So she had been snooping deeper than I thought. She'd found the correspondence about the city's offer. "What I do with my assets is my decision," I said, my temper fraying. "You have violated my trust for the last time, Brenda. The agreement is void. I want you out of my house. Tonight." This time there was no negotiation. No pleading from Mark. He came home to find Brenda packing, her face set in bitter lines. He listened to what I had to say, looked at the checkbook in my hand, and the fight seemed to go out of him. "She's right, Brenda," he said, his voice heavy with finality. "You crossed the line that can't be uncrossed. Again. You're choosing her over me?" she spat. "I'm choosing sanity over chaos," he replied. "I'm choosing to build a life, not live in the wreckage of one you keep setting on fire." She left. This time it felt permanent. The house was quiet again, but this quiet was different. It was a peaceful quiet, a healing quiet. Mark moved his things up from the basement apartment back into his old childhood bedroom. It was strange, having my adult son living in his boyhood room, but the dynamic had irrevocably changed. He was not a dependent. He was a tenant, a business partner of sorts, and most importantly, a son rediscovering his mother. He worked tirelessly building his business. He paid me back his loan every penny ahead of schedule. He continued with his therapy. We started having dinner together a few nights a week, talking about his day, my book club, the news. It was the relationship I had always wanted with my adult son. One evening over meatloaf he looked at me. "I filed for divorce, Mom." I set my fork down. "Are you sure?" "Yes," he said, no trace of doubt in his voice. The counseling helped me see it clearly. What Brenda and I had wasn't a partnership. It was a codependent disaster. I enabled her and she, well, you saw. I need a fresh start. A real one. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I'm proud of you, Mark." He smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile. "I'm starting to be proud of me, too." A few months later, with Mark's business thriving and his divorce proceedings underway, I decided the time was right. I invited him and Alistair Finch to dinner. Over dessert, I brought out a new set of documents prepared by Alistair. "Mark," I began, "you've proven yourself to be a responsible, hardworking man. You've faced your demons and you're building an honest life. That is the greatest inheritance any parent could ask for." I slid the documents toward him. "This is the new will. And this," I said, tapping a second, thicker packet, "is the purchase agreement for the land my mother left me. The city's offer was substantial. I've accepted it." His eyes widened as he read the number on the agreement. It was life-changing money. "Mom, this is—" I don't know what to say. "You don't have to say anything," I said. "The bulk of the estate, including the proceeds from the land, will be placed in a trust. You are the beneficiary, but the principal is protected. It will provide you with a steady income for life, enough to secure your future without making you lazy. A portion is also set aside for any grandchildren, for their education." I paused, letting it sink in. "And there is a clause drafted by Alistair that states any future spouse must sign a comprehensive prenuptial agreement to access any marital assets. We are protecting this legacy, Mark, from anyone who might see it as a prize to be won." Tears welled in his eyes. He wasn't looking at the numbers, he was looking at me. "You did all this for me?" "I did this because of you," I corrected gently. "Because you showed me you were worth it." Spring arrived, painting my garden in vibrant colors. Mark had moved into a small, tidy apartment of his own, a place he paid for with his own earnings. He was a proud, independent man. One Sunday he came over for our weekly lunch. "Mom," he said a little nervously, "I'd like to bring a guest next week. A friend." I looked at him, at the slight blush on his cheeks, and I smiled. "A friend. Her name is Sarah. She's a teacher. I've been seeing her for a couple of months. She's different, kind, stable." He took a deep breath. "I'd really like you to meet her." My heart swelled with a joy I hadn't felt in years. "I would be delighted to meet her, Mark." The following Sunday, I set the table with my good china, the same set Brenda had despised. I made a roast chicken. When the doorbell rang, I opened it to find Mark standing there with a woman around his age. She had warm, intelligent eyes and a gentle smile. She held a bouquet of daisies. "You must be Sophia," she said, her voice warm and sincere. "Mark talks about you all the time. These are for you." I took the flowers, my eyes misting over. "Thank you, my dear. Please come in." As I led them into the dining room, I caught Mark's eye. He looked happy, truly peacefully happy. He had finally understood his place, not as a dependent son in his mother's house, but as a man capable of building a good life, worthy of love and respect. The spitting incident, the lawyer at the breakfast table, the sold baseball cards. It had all been a brutal, necessary journey to this moment. To this peace. To this new beginning, built not on a foundation of entitlement, but on the solid, unshakable ground of earned respect and hard-won wisdom. I, Sophia Vance, was 70 years old. I had faced down betrayal, reclaimed my home, and guided my son back to himself. And as I passed the potatoes to Sarah, I knew that the best chapters of my story were still being written. Sarah was, as Mark had said, different. She was a fifth-grade teacher with a calm, grounded presence that felt like a balm after the years of Brenda's tempestuous storms. Over that first lunch, she didn't pry or flatter. She asked me about my garden, listened with genuine interest as I described the challenge of growing roses in the shade, and shared a funny story about her students' attempt to build a model volcano. I watched Mark watch her, his eyes full of a quiet, steady admiration I had never seen in him before. This wasn't the frantic, desperate infatuation he'd had for Brenda. This was the look of a man who had found a safe harbor. After lunch, as Sarah insisted on helping with the dishes, Mark pulled me aside in the hallway. "Well?" he asked, his voice hushed and hopeful. "She's lovely, Mark," I said, and I meant it. "She has a good soul." The relief on his face was profound. "She knows everything, Mom. About Brenda, the debt, the spitting. All of it. She says it just makes her admire you more." I felt a lump form in my throat. For so long, our family drama had been a source of shame. To have it met not with judgment but with admiration was a novel and healing experience. As they were leaving, Sarah turned to me on the porch. "Thank you for having me, Sophia. You have a beautiful home. It feels loved." That simple observation, that she could feel the love in these walls despite the recent strife, told me everything I needed to know about her. In the weeks that followed, Sarah became a regular and welcome presence. She helped me repot my ferns. We went to a botanical garden together. She and Mark would come over for dinner, and the conversation was easy and filled with laughter. It was the family dynamic I had always dreamed of but had never quite achieved. One evening, Sarah mentioned offhandedly that the school district was having a budget crisis, and her job as an art teacher might be cut. "It's a shame," she said with a sigh. "The arts are the first to go, but for some of those kids, it's the only reason they come to school." An idea wild and wonderful began to form in my mind. I didn't mention it to anyone. Not yet. First, I had to talk to Alistair. I met Alistair at his office, a place of quiet wood and orderly bookshelves that suited him perfectly. "The city funds have cleared," he informed me, passing a statement across the desk. The number was even more impressive seeing it printed in black and white. "The trust for Mark is established and funded as per your instructions." "Good," I said, folding the statement and placing it in my purse. "Now I have a new project for you." I laid out my idea. I wanted to create a charitable foundation, the Robert and Sophia Vance Foundation for the Arts. Its purpose would be to provide grants and funding for arts programs in underfunded public schools, specifically for music and visual arts. Alistair listened, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Sophia, this is a magnificent legacy. I want Sarah to be the executive director," I continued. "She has the passion, the knowledge, and the heart for it. It would save her job in a way and allow her to impact countless other children. She would receive a modest salary from the foundation's administrative fund." "That is a very elegant solution," Alistair agreed, "and a fitting tribute to your husband. He always did love his community." We spent the next hour sketching out the legal framework. I would endow the foundation with a significant portion of the land sale proceeds. It would be my mark on the world, a positive force born from the ashes of my personal troubles. That night, I invited Mark and Sarah for a special dinner. After dessert, I brought out the foundation's mission statement and organizational plan that Alistair had drafted. "Sarah," I began, my voice trembling slightly with emotion, "you spoke about the importance of art for children. I want to do something about it." I slid the documents across the table. She picked them up, her eyes scanning the words. As she read, her hands began to shake. Tears filled her eyes. The Robert and Sophia Vance Foundation," she whispered. Executive director? Sophia, I don't know what to say. Mark was looking over her shoulder, his face a picture of stunned pride. Mom, this is incredible. The foundation needs a leader who believes in its mission with every fiber of her being, I said to Sarah. That's you. If you want the job, it's yours. She launched herself from her chair and wrapped her arms around me in a tight, heartfelt hug. Thank you, she sobbed into my shoulder. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for believing in them. In that moment, surrounded by the two of them, I felt Robert's presence more strongly than I had in years. He would have loved this. He would have loved her. The foundation work began in earnest. Sarah threw herself into it with a ferocious joy, developing grant applications and building relationships with school principals. Mark's business was flourishing, and he helped with the foundation's logistical needs, finding office space and setting up its books. We were a team. The past, however, was not quite done with us. I returned from the grocery store one afternoon to find a familiar car parked crookedly in my driveway. Brenda was leaning against the driver's side door, her arms crossed. She looked thinner, harder. Sophia, she said, her voice stripped of its former false sweetness, now just pure bitterness. Brenda, you are trespassing. Please leave. I heard about the money, she said, ignoring me. The big land sale. And I heard about your little foundation, giving away money to strangers while your own family struggled. You are no longer my family, I said calmly, though my heart was hammering. And how I choose to use my money is my business. Mark is my husband, she shrieked, the sound echoing in the quiet street. The divorce papers say otherwise, I replied. I had my phone in my hand, my thumb hovering over the speed dial for the police. Her eyes narrowed into venomous slits. He'll never be happy with that teacher. He needs someone with fire. He'll come back to me. And when he does, all that money in that trust will be half mine. A cold dread trickled down my spine. She was delusional, but delusion made people dangerous. The trust is ironclad, Brenda, I said, my voice low and steady. Alistair Finch made sure of that. You will never see a penny of it. Now, for the last time, get off my property. For a terrifying second, I thought she might rush me. Her body tensed, her fists clenched. But then she seemed to deflate, the fight going out of her. She let out a string of curses, got in her car, and screeched away. I stood in the driveway, trembling. The encounter was a stark reminder that while we had moved on, the ghosts of our poor choices could always return to haunt us. I immediately called Alistair and then Mark, telling them both what had happened. Mark was furious. She's lost her mind. I'll get a restraining order. I should have done it months ago. That evening, he and Sarah came over. We sat in the living room, the three of us, a united front against the lingering poison of the past. She can't hurt us, Sarah said, taking Mark's hand and then reaching for mine. We have something she can never understand and can never break. She was right. We had built a fortress not of money, but of mutual respect and love. And that was a fortress no amount of bitterness could breach. A year passed. A year of peace, of growth, of profound happiness. The Vance Foundation awarded its first round of grants, funding music programs in 3 elementary schools and a pottery class at a community center. The local paper ran a feature on Sarah and the foundation, and she was careful to credit Robert and me in every interview. Seeing my husband's name in print, associated with such goodness, filled me with a deep, quiet joy. Mark's business had grown so much he hired his first employee, a young man eager to learn the trade. He was no longer just a handyman. He was a small business owner, a pillar of his community. One crisp autumn afternoon, we all gathered in my garden for a harvest celebration. Sarah, Mark, Alistair Finch, and a few of my close friends from book club were there. The garden was in its full final glory, a riot of gold, crimson, and orange. Mark stood and raised his glass. A toast, he said, his voice strong and clear. To my mother, Sophia, the strongest person I know. You didn't just save me from my mistakes. You taught me how to save myself. You showed me that justice isn't about revenge. It's about setting things right. And you showed me that family isn't just about blood. It's about who stands by you in the cold and helps you build a fire. Tears streamed down my face, unchecked and unashamed. Sarah stood beside him, her own eyes glistening. "And to new beginnings," she added, smiling at me. "And to the family we choose." As the clinking of glasses subsided, Mark reached into his pocket. He turned to Sarah, and in the dappled sunlight of the garden his father had planted, he got down on one knee. "Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you are my peace. You are my future. Will you marry me?" The garden erupted in gasps and cheers. Sarah, laughing and crying, nodded frantically. "Yes. Oh, Mark, yes." As he slipped the ring on her finger and they embraced, I looked around at the faces of my chosen family, at the home that was once again filled with love, and at the legacy of kindness that was now taking root in the world. The taste of justice, I had learned, was not bitter or cold. It was as sweet as the harvest apples from my tree, and as warm as the autumn sun on my face. The long winter was over. I, Sophia Vance, was finally home.